Hi everyone, so welcome to another Interviews by AirLyft session. We have Katie here from Moonbeam. Katie, it's a pleasure to host you today for this interview session with us. Thank you so much for taking out the time to meet with us.
Absolutely, I'm glad to be here.
Fantastic. So Katie, could you just give us a brief background description about yourself? Just introduce yourself to the community, yeah.
Okay, I'll keep it brief. So my name is Katie. I run marketing for the Moonbeam Network. My past life in the Web 2 space was really centered around marketing to engineers. That was something I always really loved. And so when an opportunity kind of arose in the crypto space to, again, like really focus on this technical talent and getting folks kind of what they need from a dev resources perspective, as well as to cater to them from a marketing perspective, I jumped on it. So I've been in the crypto space for just under 3 years now, and I don't think I'd ever go back.
Fantastic, fantastic. Yeah, it's an exciting time for Web3, definitely. And yeah, I've also just joined the crypto space. It's been less than a year, honestly. And it just really keeps me on my toes. Definitely it does.
Yeah, I like to describe it as, you know, there's no one master of all things crypto. There's so many little pockets that you can kind of immerse yourself in. And so there's a place for everyone, right? You can find expertise in all sorts of different corners of the world without ever really truly mastering kind of every piece of it. So it's a fascinating place to be.
Fantastic, fantastic. Let's quickly now move on to the questions. I know you don't have much time. Obviously, you have a lot on your plate. So I'll start with the first question. So when I was just looking at your project website, now specifically catering to our community, from what it sometimes gets confusing because sometimes people think that Moonbeam is the main net and Moonriver is the test net. Could you just explain some basic differences between both just to help our community understand?
Sure. And if you'll bear with me for a minute, let me just back up a little bit and also talk about Polkadot. So for those who aren't familiar, Polkadot is basically a new way of approaching building blockchains, right? They've developed this thing called Substrate, where all the blockchains connecting to Polkadot, they share this underlying framework so they can talk to each other and interact with each other in really rich, interesting ways. So yes, token movement, but also a lot of other kinds of interesting use cases we see in the near term on the horizon. So that could be things like storing assets in one place and your smart contracts in another. And so we see kind of this like hybrid convergence happening on Polkadot, which is one of the reasons we're so bullish about it. And so when you get Moonbeam and our role in this ecosystem, Moonbeam is the place where Dapps are being built, right? So Polkadot itself doesn't have smart contract functionality. Moonbeam has really catered to this Ethereum style way of doing things. And so that includes, of course, supporting all of the tools from Ethereum, all of the, the smart contract language, which is Solidity, but also Viper. We support their account standard, their wallets, just everything from an approach perspective, we try to support fully. And so that has allowed us to have, over 100 dApps building on us kind of as we speak now, even though we're only, 10 weeks from launch here. So it's been a really interesting experience for us. And so that's Moonbeam. We look at Moonriver, which we call kind of like a sister network. Okay. It lives on Kusama. And so part of this confusion stems from the fact that the Polkadot Kusama relationship can also be confusing. But really the place for Kusama and Moonriver, which lives on top of Kusama, while Moonbeam lives on top of Polkadot, the place for that is a permanent incentivized canary net, right? So it will continue in perpetuity to run alongside Polkadot. It's not a temporary thing, it's not short-lived, and it does have value. It has tokens with actual economic value. And so the concept there is, you could take a test net and try and manufacture some of these ways to hack into it and kind of pay people to try and find loopholes, or you could actually just have the tokens have value and see what people do with it. And so the rationale is, by attaching real value, you'll find kind of more interesting things, and it'll be kind of all the safer for it when you build it in permanently. And so Kusama has very much kind of started with this heritage and expanded to become, I like to call it more of a playground. It's kind of the less formal, let's experiment and see what happens type network, but it will continue to live alongside Polkadot. And so Moonbeam and Moonriver, in much the same way, will run in perpetuity. But we do anticipate for Moonriver, because of the way the tokens were distributed last year in the crowd loan, where 30% went directly to community members. And then, of course, the remaining tokens are still distributed to community members through grant programs and things like that. We do expect that that will help change the dynamics of Moonbeam versus Moonriver, because it will very much be in the hands of the community. They'll kind of be deciding through on-chain governance. So we'll see how things kind of shift in the future, but for right now, there is kind of that shared code base, some of the same applications, not all of them. But in the future, we think they'll probably kind of take two paths and become unique in their own right.
Fantastic, fantastic. Now, when you talk about tokens, you have two tokens right now, the Glimmer and Moonriver tokens. Could you just explain the utilities behind each?
Yeah, so MOVR is the utility token for the Moonriver network, and Glimmer is the utility token for the Moonbeam network. And so they both basically share the same basic utility, which is, certainly for staking. You're staking these tokens natively to collators, which is basically infrastructure on the network, right? You're helping kind of maintain the liveness of the network. So you can stake Glimmer and MOVR to collators and earn rewards in the form of Glimmer and MOVR. You can participate in on-chain governance with these utility tokens. And then, of course, you can pay for transaction fees and smart contract execution as well. So it kind of has many of the same inherent kind of utility features of ETH with the added, proof of stake and on-chain governance that comes with Polkadot.
Okay. Now, when you talk about Dapps also, which are being built on Moonbeam, could you just give us a few examples of the ones which are available for users to use right now?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest names that folks would probably recognize would be Sushi and Curve. So those are both currently live on Moonbeam. We do also have native DEXs deployed. So Stella Swap comes to mind. Solar Flare is another one. And I would just point out, so because Moonbeam has just launched, we're basically in this infrastructure deployment period. We're waiting for kind of key oracles to come online so that we can also work with the teams to deploy lending and borrowing. Moonwell is kind of one of the more notable ones there. And then we also have liquid staking coming through Lido. And we have, what was the other one I was going to mention? Firefly derivatives. So we have kind of these three really interesting projects coming to Moonbeam very shortly. They're just waiting for some of these last few infrastructure pieces to be available, and then those will deploy. But right now, there's certainly many DEXs as well as many bridges already live and available.
Fantastic, fantastic. And right now, onboarding also must be going on full steam ahead, I'm sure. Definitely.
Yeah, I think so. We were looking at our announcement calendar for January and February, right? Because we're working with all of these different ecosystem projects to make sure they're supported. And I think we had over 30 announcements in January. Wow. And another 30 in February, with obviously quite a few queued up for March as well. So it's been pretty wild. We're trying to keep up with it as much as we can, but it's a little bit of, it's kind of, fits and bursts here. Like there's just little pockets of lots of applications deploy on the same day, and then it gets a little quiet, and then they kind of come back and in full force shortly thereafter. So we're just trying to kind of manage it and work with the teams as best we can.
Perfect, perfect. Now coming to the next questions, when we talk about governance proposals, how can users sort of participate in this on Moonbeam?
Yeah, so this is actually really interesting because we just did an announcement about this recently, and this is very unique to Moonbeam in the Polkadot ecosystem. So on-chain governance is actually available for any parachain that wants it, right? So this substrate thing I mentioned at the beginning, you can basically pick and choose which functionality you want. So if you want on-chain governance, you can add in the democracy palette. We've done that. And so in order to participate prior to last week, you would have to go to the Polkadot JS web application and actually directly vote on governance there. And that was kind of a pain because, like I mentioned again, we focused on these Ethereum style addresses. We focused on Ethereum formatted wallets like MetaMask. And so there was a little bit of a disconnect there in terms of usability. So last week we just announced that we worked with the Polk Assembly team to deploy MetaMask support. So what that means now is, everything you do on Moonbeam is really centered around the MetaMask wallet. And so now you can even use Polk Assembly to vote on governance through MetaMask. So this is really interesting, even though maybe at face value, it doesn't sound interesting, because behind the scenes, what's happening is you're using something that's an Ethereum style thing, an Ethereum formatted thing, and interacting with Substrate, which is this Polkadot format. And so we've connected those two things with something called a precompile. We basically created a democracy precompile to allow that to happen, to allow that connection to happen. And that's the sort of thing that we're kind of continually working on. How can we continue to unite these two different approaches to things to make usability better on Moonbeam, but also, of course, for the whole ecosystem, because the more assets that come into Moonbeam and Moonriver, the more assets that are available to the whole ecosystem.
Got it. Now, when we talk about EVM compatibility, how is Moonbeam different from layer 1 EVM compatible chains?
So there's a couple different things. I would say, first and foremost, a lot of EVM chains, at least kind of a year or two ago, were forks of Ethereum. And that was, you have to look like that's all Geth-based stuff, right? They're all kind of sharing the same underlying code base. And that's not what Moonbeam is, right? We're very much native to the Polkadot ecosystem, built on Substrate, written in Rust, integrating all of these key functionalities from Polkadot and just trying to unite them and make the end user experience as seamless as possible. So it's a little bit kind of how we're built, which at face value may seem a little in the weeds or a little technical, but how it works for users, I think, is a pretty large impact when you think of, first of all this interoperability that is possible through Polkadot. That's something that we uniquely have available to us. The other thing I would look at is just like scalability and changes over time. Like we're going to continue to benefit as Polkadot matures, as Polkadot is continued to be built out. Moonbeam will continue to mature with it. And so when you look at scalability improvements and things like that over time, we will also benefit from those.
Got it. Now you just mentioned interoperability, right? You have your XC20 token, which I've read conforms to the standards of ERC20 token. Could you just sort of give us a little bit insight into this token, particularly considering it's a huge innovation from Moonbeam?
So it's actually not a token; it's a token standard.
Okay.
And so this is actually kind of on a similar topic to the precompile thing I mentioned earlier. So really what Moonbeam does is emulate the Ethereum environment as closely as we can. And so that includes ERC20 style tokens. When you deploy a token natively to Moonbeam, it is in an ERC20 format. And so what we really wanted to do is find a way for those ERC20s to move across the whole Polkadot ecosystem as if they were this Substrate style of doing things. So that's what an XC20 is. An XC20 is basically a new format, which is really behind the scenes an ERC20 with a precompile. So we've basically kind of added a little shortcut here to enable these tokens to move natively across the Substrate ecosystem. So if you deploy tokens on Moonbeam, you as a developer have the benefit of the same kind of ease of deployment, ease of minting that you would from any ERC20, but you can also benefit from being able to move it not just around Moonbeam, but around the relay chain on Polkadot, around all of the parachains connected to Polkadot and so forth. So it really does let you take, we always position it as like this best of both worlds thing, but it lets you take advantage of the whole value prop of interoperability without losing that ease of use from Ethereum.
That's great. Honestly, that's excellent. Now, when you're building on Moonbeam, right, obviously you have many programming languages out there. Apart from Solidity, is there any other programming language that you guys incentivize programmers and developers to come in? Can they do it on Moonbeam?
So right now we're focusing just on Solidity and Viper. And the intention there, again, is to really make sure that that experience is as excellent as possible. And so you'll see that all of the things that we've done recently are really to either continue to improve the developer experience, continue to improve the end user experience, or to continue to unite these like Ethereum style concepts and Polkadot style concepts into like one cohesive experience. So I would say that's probably going to continue to be our focus for some time. I wouldn't rule out, supporting some other languages in the future, but for right now, like we're really focused on making that developer experience when you first deploy seamless. And then kind of down the road, I think we'll look to, okay, where does it make sense to expand? What do we want to do with our network and our language support?
Got it. Now, obviously, right now, this thing, I personally have acquired a couple of Moonriver and GLMR tokens from the centralized exchanges. Is there any other way that one can acquire them?
Yeah, there are. So we do have, of course, DEXs that are deployed to both Moonbeam and Moonriver. We do also have programs for the community. So we have grant programs. There's actually also a bug bounty program through Immunify, which folks may be familiar with. And so the intention of these kinds of things are really to just provide ways for the community to kind of contribute back and then kind of earn rewards. We're also looking to do things like bounty programs around content. We haven't deployed anything yet, but in that instance, it could be, again, like a different way for someone who maybe is less technical or isn't interested in building to contribute and to kind of learn and help promote education around Moonbeam and maybe earn tokens in kind of compensation or rewards for that. And so we're working on programs like that to add in as well from a marketing perspective, but certainly like the grants program, I think is really the number one way that community members are getting access to tokens right now.
Fantastic. Now on your website also, I read that obviously it's not that easy to build your own parachain or parathread, right? But Moonbeam makes it easier. So can you just tell us as to why, it compares, how Moonbeam compares, if developers, from a developer's point of view, as compared to creating your own parachain or parathread?
Sure. Well, just for the first point here, we've been working on Moonbeam for 2.5 years now. That's how long it took us to launch a parachain. And part of that is because parachains weren't live yet. So I can't claim that that was all kind of, like you could probably compress that time quite a bit. And Substrate, this framework I mentioned, does allow you to deploy pretty quickly. But inherently the issues, mostly for Dapps, if you look at kind of the Dapps scenario, let's say you have only Dapps live on an Ethereum style chain, you probably have it already written in Solidity, and you probably already have some token live or some number of tokens live. And so when you look to Polkadot, if you have to build your own parachain, okay, well, first you have to go hire a team that knows Rust. I can tell you this is really difficult. All the folks in the Polkadot ecosystem are competing with each other for Rust developers. It's really difficult to find talent in order to build these parachains. Even when you do find those Rust developers, you're going to have to take all the code that you already have and rewrite it for this Rust style environment if you want to build your own parachain. And because now it's its own layer one, right? Don't forget that parachains are all their own layer one. You have to consider, how do you want to approach governance? What are the mechanisms you want to build in? How are you going to produce blocks? So I mentioned we had these collators. So you got to do you got to build your own collator program and recruit them and come up with a compensation model. And then of course, like, what are you going to do for your tokenomics? How are you going to distribute that? How are you going to go to market? How are you going to bootstrap the cost of a parachain if you want a parachain? Parathreads are a little different where you could kind of do this pay as you go model. So it kind of reduces the bootstrapping piece. But I think, the real barriers between all of those things are like hiring, rewriting, and then there's just a lot of business oriented things that come with deploying a parachain. And so what I really like about the idea of coming at least first to a parachain, whether it be Moonbeam or another parachain, is you can kind of like get into the ecosystem, prove whether there's traction or not, right? Because there's a lot of newness around Polkadot. I think Moonbeam was the first parachain to launch in January. So it's a maximum of 10 weeks for parachains here to be live and kind of producing things. So it's just so new, and it's difficult for all teams to know whether this is a place they can be successful. And like, of course, we think that's a resounding yes, but I think that that's a lesson they need to learn for themselves. And so what Moonbeam really does is like, hey, deploy here first. It's really fast. We continually hear from people building on top of Moonbeam that it's the easiest experience among any EVM chain, which of course we love to hear. And down the road, if they want to kind of transition into their own parachain, they have that runway, they have that time, and they can kind of make a more gradual experience there if they want. So we like to talk about it as an on-ramp, like come in, try it out. The water's fine. And then if you guys want to kind of build your own layer one, either in parallel or eventually transition into one, that door is open. We're happy to help you guys do that. It is a lot of work.
Fantastic, fantastic. Interesting, definitely. I think you guys are making lives easier, but obviously, as you said, it's not easy getting developers, who are programming in Rust. So obviously there's a lot of competition. There's a lack of talent, definitely, scarcity. Now, the last question, Katie, which I think all the community members would love to know. Obviously, it's been, I think, 2.5, 3 years for Moonbeam. So let's say 10 years down the line, what's the cherry on top for you guys?
I don't know. 10 years. That's a long
time. Oh, okay. Let's cut it short by 5 years then. 5 years.
So like I look at things from the marketing perspective because that's where all of my attention's focused these days. So the things I'm kind of looking at are like the next year or so, we're really going to get as many dApps deployed to Moonbeam as possible. And that's going to be a mix of the projects that we know are already building, the projects that have deployed to Moon River and are waiting for some of this key functionality to be available on Moonbeam so that they can also deploy there. But it's also going to be new teams. And
hopefully we
just
will
kind
be
of
one
spread.
of them as well. Yes.
Yes, I would love to see you guys there. And so I think that is going to be kind of the short-term runway. From there, I think we're going to do a couple things. Like we're going to continue to expand our technology to optimize it for the use cases that we know have become really popular. So the conversations we're having now are with teams on Moon River that either have been like wildly successful or are trying to figure out what their next move is in terms of expansion. And we're trying to figure out how to make that experience for them as good as it can be so that, come Moonbeam, when they deploy, they have a successful experience there as well. So we're looking to that, but we're also looking to expanding to other kinds of use cases. How can we talk to JavaScript developers who maybe aren't as tapped into the Web3 ecosystem? How can we bring them in the fold? And then, of course, once we have some meaningful number of applications, obviously we're well on our way right now, but once we have kind of that feeling of, oh, wow, there's just a ton happening here, that's when I think we'll really start to expand awareness from the broader ecosystem, right? And I think this is something that is really tough so far because not a lot of people really understand Polkadot. There's kind of this feeling of it's been around for a couple of years, but nothing's really happening. But a lot of that's because smart contract functionality just launched like a couple months ago through parachains. And so I think what we're trying to do is really open those doors and say, there is a lot happening here. We're already seeing a ton of traction. Just come try it out and see what the difference can make. So there's quite a bit happening, certainly on that side from a marketing perspective. So I think from a 1 to 5 year perspective, you'll start to see a lot more kind of regular folks come into the ecosystem, not just from kind of the crypto world where they're already familiar with it and they're either looking for new applications or new things to tinker around with, but also from a developer perspective. I think we want to also open those doors a little bit more. So I think our ambitions are pretty big in that sense.
That's excellent. Honestly, Web3 has its own small universe, and Web2 is the whole world, So definitely, I think a transition for a lot of traditional people to get into Web3, I think is the next big thing for sure, because obviously that's how the community will further grow, because once the limited number of people who are actively involved in Web3 gets exhausted, you have to look for backwards to the people who are still stuck in Web2.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a lot of potential there once we can figure out what the 1 or 2 use cases are that are valuable to them, right? Because maybe they don't want to abandon the 10 years of JavaScript experience they have to go try Solidity. Maybe they just want 1 or 2 things they can add into their Web2 application to make it more powerful using the blockchain. So I think those are the things that we'll start to think about. In my head, it's penciled in for like years 2 and beyond, but that's what we'll start to look to, once we really start to demonstrate the value of Polkadot and the usage of Polkadot that we're seeing through Moonbeam. That's kind of our next stepping stone from a marketing perspective.
Fantastic, fantastic. Katie, I want to thank you so much for taking up the time today and answering those questions in a lot of detail. Definitely it will make it easier for our community members to understand the whole concept behind Moon River, Moonbeam, Kusama, Polkadot, and everything, and the road ahead, and what you've been doing so far. Thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.